Okay, so we're going to look at our very first logical reasoning question. The first thing I want you to look at is the question stem. This is the part of the question that tells you what your assignment is, what the task is. Okay, so you don't want to veer too far from this assignment. Even though there are going to be answer choices that's like, yeah, forget about what this said, do this other thing, right? What do we call those? Traps. Okay, so you don't want to fall for traps. Now, this question stem says, which one of the following most accurately expresses the main conclusion of the economist's argument? Our task here is to accurately express the main conclusion, meaning the economist gave an argument, right? This is the economist's argument, and within the argument, there is a main conclusion. Now, already, the concepts we've discussed are coming back. The idea of what an argument is, premise supporting a conclusion, that idea is coming back. Other concepts that we've covered will be present as well, and I'll call them out when we encounter them, but that's the first one. We need to identify the economist's argument and what the economist's conclusion is. And in order to do that, you have to figure out where the economist's argument is. Not everything is part of his or her argument. And here I'm hinting at the idea of context versus argument. Let's take a look. Every business thrives to increase its productivity. For this increases profits for the owners and the likelihood that the business will survive. So here is an explanation of why every business strives to increase productivity. Well, yeah, why is that? Why don't they just not increase productivity? Why bother being so busy? Well, the economist tells you why. It's because increasing productivity increases profits for owners and the likelihood that the business will survive. Okay, fine, but apply our rule of thumb. When you encounter the word but or however, just call everything above it context and everything below it argument and see if it works, right? Like I said, it's a rule of thumb's not always going to work, but the vast majority of the time it will work. The economist says, okay, I've told you that. This is how businesses operate. This is why they strive to increase productivity. But now pay attention. Here's what I really want to say. What I really want to convince you of is that not all efforts to increase productivity are beneficial to the business as a whole. Often, attempts to increase productivity decrease number of employees, which clearly harms, right, not beneficial, harms the dismissed employees as well as the sense of security. It also harms the sense of security of the employees that didn't get dismissed. All right, so we know the argument is here. Now the job is just to identify the premise and the conclusion. Which of these two statements supports the other statement? And again, if you have no idea, it'll be a time-consuming process if you truly had absolutely no idea, but you could do it. You just have to slap either a premise conclusion label like this or a conclusion premise label like this and ask yourself, well, given that this statement is true, am I more likely to believe this statement? Or is it given that this statement is true, I'm more likely to believe this statement? Which version flows? This version flows. Think about it. If it's true that often attempts to increase productivity decrease the number of employees, which has two effects. It hurts the employees that got fired, and it hurts the employees that didn't get fired because now they're scared. Let's say that's true. Well, then don't you see in that world, it's more likely to be true that not all efforts to increase productivity are beneficial to business as a whole. Specifically, what part of the business are you not benefiting? The employees, right? So the support flows this way. This claim here is supporting this first claim. Whereas if you try to flip it around, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's say that not all efforts to increase productivity are beneficial to the business as a whole. Okay, fine. So there are some efforts that are not beneficial to the business as a whole. Just because that claim is true doesn't make me more likely to believe that this claim, this specific effort, is the one that's harmful. Why can't it be some other effort that is harmful? So the support doesn't flow this way. It doesn't flow down this way, right? And another way you want to think about this is if I tell you like, not every cat is a nice cat. Oh, therefore Tom's a bad cat. That's not fair to Tom. Just because Tom's like, why me? Just because not every cat is bad, why am I a bad cat? Versus now, if you imagine it says, Tom is not a good cat. Tom is a bad cat. Therefore, not every cat is a good cat. See, that support flows. If we know of Tom being a bad cat, then of course not every cat is a good cat. Okay, so there we've identified, right? We've put to use the skills in argument analysis, right? Argument analysis to identify the different components of an argument. The author, our economist, tells us that often attempts to increase productivity harms the employees that are fired and harms the employees that aren't fired. Therefore, I conclude not every effort to increase productivity benefits the business as a whole. Here's the conclusion. For this kind of question, which is called the main point or main conclusion question, and this is the first type of question that you're going to have to get good at on logical reasoning, because this is a foundational skill in logical reasoning. You have to be able to identify the components and slap labels on the components of an argument before we can get to the more advanced tasks of analyzing the support structure. Okay, so once you are able to slap a label of conclusion on one part of the argument, you are going to turn to the answers and just ignore everything else that is not the conclusion. In other words, you get tunnel vision. Okay, you just get tunnel vision. This is all you see. And you ask yourself, is A saying the same thing? Is B saying the same thing? Is C saying the same thing? Is D? Is E? Whichever answer choice is saying the same thing as this answer choice is your correct answer. And this is where our lesson in formal logic comes in. There are many different ways in English to express the same idea. That just is a fact of our language. I can say, not all cats are good cats. Or I can say, some cats are not good cats. Even though I've used different words, I've said the same thing. Okay, so this is more convoluted. The noun let's look at this sentence, right? The noun, what's the noun? Efforts, right? Efforts to what? To increase productivity. So we're modifying efforts, right? You could talk about efforts, so whatever. Not all efforts to study for the LSAT are beneficial to whatever, right? Not all efforts to whatever it is. Here, it's very specific. Not all efforts to increase productivity. That's the modified version of the noun. Are what? Are beneficial. Beneficial to what? You see, you just get a whole lot of detail. The main difference between the sentence that we're staring at right now versus the sentence that we considered in the earlier lesson is the complexity of the details. I didn't talk about like what kind of dogs. I could have said, like not all dogs that wear red hats on Sundays and chase squirrels on Wednesdays are good for families with small children under the age of 3, but only go to daycare on odd days of the month. You see, if I had said that, then that would be like at the level of detail, like so much detail and complexity that matches, even surpasses perhaps this sentence. But, of course, it gave a simplified version to capture the point. Now they blow the point up to include complexity. So what do? You still have to be able to do the grammar analysis to drill down to the basic components of subject plus its modifiers, predicate plus its modifiers, so that you can see that in spite of all this complexity, the sentence really is just of the form, not all x's are y's, right? Which is the same as not every x is a y. Again, with the, grammar quirk of plurals, singulars, which, like we said, is the same as some x's are not y's, right? And here, look, some, what's the x? Efforts to increase productivity. Here they use slightly different words. Instead of saying efforts to increase productivity, they're using measures taken by a business to increase productivity. Well, that's close enough. Here are not y, right? What is the y? Beneficial to business as a whole. So you have to say not beneficial to the business as a whole. Fail to be beneficial to the business as a whole, right? Not y. All right, so before we turn our attention to the wrong answers, I just want to recap here the core concepts this question tested on. One of the ideas is what an argument is. This is the most foundational idea to all of logical reasoning, premise that supports a conclusion. Another idea is this difference between context versus argument, which here we saw they introduced that transition with the word but. A third idea is a formal logic idea of expressing equivalence using some and all. All three of these ideas are playing together to get us to the right answer choice of B. Now let's look at A. If an action taken to secure the survival of business fails to enhance the welfare of the business employees, that action cannot be good for the business as a whole. One thing I want you to notice about the wrong answer choices is how trappy they are, right? How attractive they seem, how they're using the same words that we encountered in the stimulus. So it gets really confusing to evaluate whether this is to even evaluate like what it is that we're doing. You get sucked into trying to understand what the sentence is saying. Now, as you progress, your skills will get sharpened. You will recognize very quickly that A cannot be right for the simple reason that this is a conditional statement. Now, I know I haven't talked about conditional statements in properly introduced conditional statements, but again, I'll appeal to your intuition. You know what conditional statements are. It's a statement that takes the form if X then Y, right? If something happens, then something happens, right? That's what A is. If this thing happens, then this thing happens, right? If this is the case, then this is the case. Now, that's simply not what we're saying. We're not saying in our conclusion anything conditional or hypothetical. We're simply saying in our conclusion that there are some measures that businesses take that fail to benefit the business as a whole. A, on the other hand, is a conditional statement. It's saying if an action meets this criteria, then we can say that the action is, quote unquote, not good for the business as a whole. I mean, we can spend all day playing the criteria game. What criteria must be met in order for us to say that an action can or cannot be good for business as a whole? Maybe it's this criteria, maybe it's some other criteria, but it doesn't matter. It is not relevant to the instructions that we were given at the very top of this question. That's what I meant when I said earlier that these wrong answer choices will lead you astray. Come play over here. Forget this thing that you're trying to do. Just come over here and play with me and waste a bunch of time. Or better yet, pick this answer choice and miss the point. Maybe it's a stretch to say all, but certainly a lot of wrong answer choices, if they're worth their salt, they're going to try to tempt you away from what it is that you're trying to do. Now, for the same reason, you can get rid of C only if the employees of business are also blah, blah, blah. Enabling measure will benefit. This is also a conditional statement. And once again, once you have more practice with this, you'll recognize these statements very quickly. Unlike A, which lays out a sufficient condition, C first lays out a necessary condition. But we can get rid of C for the same reason that we got rid of A, which is that our conclusion just isn't a conditional claim. D is also a wrong answer, but it's wrong for a different reason. D says there is no business that does not make efforts to increase its productivity. So there's a double negative in here, right? And again, do a translation so that the double negative goes away. And here, knowing that you can apply formal logic to this, perhaps you can abstract away from the difficulties introduced by the complexity, all the unnecessary details of this particular sentence. Maybe we can deal with a simple sentence. And if we can figure out what the rule is to get rid of the double negative in the simple sentence, we can then take that rule, reapply it to the complex sentence, right? Let's just say maybe there is no dog that is not loyal, right? There is no business dog that does not make efforts to increase productivity. I'm just going to say, you know what, all that stuff I'm just going to say is not loyal, right? Because I don't care about the specific way in which it's loyal or not loyal, just some simple idea so that I can focus on how to get rid of the double negative. What does it mean when I say there is no dog that's not loyal? That means every dog is loyal, right? There's no dog that's not loyal. Every dog is loyal. So here, the rule is you just drop the nose. That's what it looks like, right? You just drop the nose. This becomes an every, you drop the nose, and that's it, right? The subject is still dog, predicate is now without the negation version. So here, applying it back to this, we would say every business does make efforts to increase its productivity. All right, great. Now we understand what the sentence is saying without the complicating double negatives. Every business makes an effort to increase its productivity. I get that. Is that what the sentence is saying? The answer is no. Right? That's the simple reason why it's wrong. Now, I said it's interesting because this does match something in the stimulus. It matches this part of it. Right? Look at this. Every business strives to increase its productivity. That's exactly what every business makes efforts to increase its productivity. Now, it could be that the economists wanted to argue this, right? It could be, but you have to imagine now, sorry, this is getting really messy, and I'm sorry about that, but you can imagine that like if these statements didn't exist, if all the economists said to us was a first statement, look, Increasing productivity increases profits for business owners and the likelihood that the business survive. Therefore, every business strives to increase its productivity. If the economist had just said that, then D would be the right answer. In other words, if these sentences didn't exist. But these sentences do exist. And the existence of this word but renders all this first statement just context, just setup for what the economist really wants to talk about. Okay, so that's why D isn't the right answer. Now, lastly, E says decreasing the number of employees in a business undermines the sense of security of retained employees. This is true, right? Just like D, this is a true claim. And in fact, it just parrots something that the argument already said, but it's not the conclusion. It's parroting the premise. Now, you might wonder why this answer choice is in here, where they're asking us to identify the conclusion. Why would they just give us a premise, right? I mean, that's what E is. It's just the premise of the argument. One of the premises of the argument anyway. The reason is because as a trap answer choice in main point, main conclusion questions, again, this is not always 100% true, but it is a trap that the LSAT writers like to utilize quite frequently. And it's this trap of just, saying whatever the last thing was that they said, right? Notice that that's what D is. D is just the last thing that you read. Clearly harms the dismissed employees as well as the sense of security of the retained employees. So if that's the last thing in your mind that you read and you're not answering, not following instructions, right? Just like, herp derp, what's the last thing that I read? Something about harming the sense of security of the employees who are still there, then that would just lead you right over to answer choice E. Okay, so to review, we've seen a bunch of the core concepts of logical reasoning in action in this question. What an argument is, premise that supports a conclusion, the difference between argument and context, and how important it is to figure that out, right? Identifying logically equivalent statements so that even when you identify the conclusion, they still, one more step, try to hide that conclusion by disguising it using different words that nonetheless express the same thing. And finally, some common traps when a conclusion is not a conditional statement. They give you conditional answers. All right, well, you can eliminate those fairly quickly. Right? They give you the conclusion in some other argument that could have been the main argument, but instead here it's just the context for our argument. And lastly, a trap answer choice that merely parrots back to you the last thing that you read.